Sinister stories.
Ethan was a 26-year-old software engineer who prided himself on his meticulous approach to life. He kept his apartment in pristine condition, curated his routines with care, and cherished his solitude. Yet, after years of living alone, the desire for companionship nudged him towards finding a roommate. He wanted someone who shared his habits, someone who wouldn't disrupt the delicate balance he had crafted. After sifting through numerous applications, Ethan found someone who seemed ideal. David was a quiet, introverted writer who worked from home. During their interview, David was soft-spoken, respectful, and appeared to have the same appreciation for cleanliness and order that Ethan did. His references were glowing, and his previous landlords praised him as the perfect tenant. Ethan felt a rare excitement at the prospect of having someone around, someone who might even become a friend. David moved in on a crisp autumn day. He brought with him only a few boxes of books and a single suitcase of clothes. Ethan was pleased by the minimalism and offered to help David settle in. They chatted briefly about their routines, boundaries, and shared spaces. Everything seemed perfect. The first few weeks were uneventful. David was indeed quiet and kept mostly to himself, often staying in his room to write. The two of them shared occasional meals, engaging in light conversation about their interests and work. Ethan appreciated David's unobtrusiveness and admired his dedication to writing. Sometimes, though, Ethan would hear the faint sound of David talking to himself in his room, but he dismissed it as the eccentricity of a writer. One night, Ethan was jolted awake by a loud thud. Disoriented, he glanced at his clock. It was 3:15 a.m. The noise had come from David's room. Worried, he got up and knocked on David's door. "David, are you okay?" Ethan called softly. There was no answer, just a muffled rustling sound. After a moment, David opened the door, his face pale and eyes wide. "Sorry, Ethan, I dropped a book. Go back to sleep," David said, his voice trembling slightly. Ethan nodded and returned to his room, but sleep eluded him. Something about David's expression unsettled him. Over the next few days, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed small things. David's odd habit of rearranging the books on the living room shelf repeatedly, the way he seemed to avoid making eye contact, and the increasingly frequent times Ethan heard him talking to himself late at night. One evening, Ethan decided to confront David about it. They were sitting in the living room, the TV murmuring in the background. "David, is everything all right? You've seemed a bit distracted lately," Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. David looked up, his eyes momentarily filled with an emotion Ethan couldn't quite identify. Fear? Paranoia? "I'm fine, Ethan. Just working through some difficult parts of my book. You know how it is," David replied with a strained smile. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't convinced. That night, curiosity got the better of him. After David had retired to his room, Ethan decided to do a bit of investigating. He felt guilty, but he needed to understand what was going on. He quietly approached David's room and listened. The muffled talking was there again, more urgent this time. Ethan gently pressed his ear to the door and caught fragments of David's murmurs. "I can't. No, it's not ready. Please, not again." Ethan's heart pounded. Who was David talking to? He decided to knock, but before his knuckles met the wood, the talking stopped abruptly. He quickly retreated to his own room, his mind racing. The next day, Ethan couldn't focus on his work. His mind kept drifting back to the strange happenings. When he got home, he found David in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall. Ethan cleared his throat, causing David to jump. "Ethan, you startled me," David said, trying to laugh it off. "David, I need to know what's going on. I heard you talking last night. Who were you talking to?" Ethan demanded, unable to mask his concern. David's face paled and he looked down. "It's nothing, Ethan. Just nightmares. Sometimes I talk in my sleep." Ethan wasn't convinced, but decided to let it go. That night, he resolved to get to the bottom of it. He stayed up, waiting until he was sure David was asleep. Then, he carefully picked the lock to David's room, feeling a pang of guilt, but driven by a need for answers. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a small lamp. Papers and books were scattered everywhere, but what caught Ethan's eye was a small, ornate box on the desk. It looked out of place among the clutter. He approached it cautiously and lifted the lid. Inside, there was a collection of old photographs, each depicting different people. Ethan recognized David in some of them, looking much younger. As he flipped through the photos, he noticed that in each one, David was with a different person, and they all had the same vacant, haunted look in their eyes. Suddenly, the door creaked open behind him. Ethan spun around to see David standing in the doorway, his face a mask of fury and fear. "What are you doing in here?" David hissed, stepping forward. Ethan backed away, holding up his hands. "I'm sorry, David, I needed to know what's going on." David's expression softened and he slumped against the doorframe. "You shouldn't have seen those," he muttered. "Now you're involved too." "Involved in what?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. David closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "There's something you need to understand. I'm not alone. I haven't been for a long time. These people, they were my roommates like you, and someone is attached to me. It needs them." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" David looked up, his eyes filled with despair. "It's a presence, a spirit. I don't know what it is, but it follows me, feeds on the people close to me. Every time I move, it comes with me. I thought I could control it, keep it at bay, but it's getting stronger." Ethan stepped back, horror dawning on him. "You need to leave, David. You need to get out of here." David shook his head. "It won't help. It will just follow me to the next place, the next person. I'm cursed, Ethan, and now so are you." Ethan's mind raced. He needed to get away, to find a way to break whatever curse this was. But as he looked at David, he saw the hopelessness in his eyes. Ethan turned and fled the room, leaving David behind. Over the next few days, Ethan tried to distance himself from David, avoiding him as much as possible. He began researching curses and hauntings, desperate for a solution. Meanwhile, David's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He barely left his room, and when he did, he looked gaunt and haunted. One night, as Ethan was poring over old texts on the supernatural, he felt a chill in the room. The air grew heavy, and he sensed a presence behind him. Slowly, he turned around. Standing in the doorway was a shadowy figure, indistinct but undeniably there. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the figure glided closer, its form shifting and pulsating with an otherworldly energy. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached out, its shadowy hand brushing against Ethan's chest. A wave of cold washed over him, and he felt a deep, suffocating fear. Images flashed in his mind, the faces of David's previous roommates, their eyes empty and lifeless. He realized with growing horror that he was next. In a desperate bid, Ethan stumbled backwards, breaking the contact. The shadow recoiled slightly, giving him a momentary respite. He bolted from his apartment, not stopping until he was outside, gulping in the fresh night air. The presence didn't follow him, but he knew it was still there, lurking in the shadows of his home. Ethan didn't return that night. Instead, he checked into a motel, trying to collect his thoughts. He needed a plan, a way to rid himself of this curse. But as he lay in the unfamiliar bed, sleep eluding him, he realized the true horror of his situation. There was no escaping it. David's words echoed in his mind. "Now you're involved too." Morning came, and Ethan knew he had to confront David one last time. He returned to the apartment, the air thick with dread. David was waiting for him in the living room, looking more spectral than human. "I'm sorry, Ethan," David said quietly. "I thought I could protect you, but it's too strong now." Ethan nodded, feeling a grim determination settle over him. "We need to find a way to end this, David, together." David looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "There might be a way, but it's dangerous. We'll need to confront it directly, force it to reveal itself." As they prepared for the confrontation, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their chances were slim. The shadow was a relentless force, and he had no idea how to combat something so malevolent. That night, they gathered in the living room, candles flickering around them. David began chanting in an ancient language, his voice trembling but resolute. Ethan stood beside him, gripping a worn talisman they gripped tightly between his fingers. As David's chant grew louder, the air in the room thickened, and a cold breeze swept through the apartment. The shadowy figure began to materialize, a swirling mass of darkness with eyes like burning coals. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the entity's malevolence radiating off it, seeping into his bones. Beside him, David's voice rose to a fevered pitch, the chant becoming more urgent and intense. "David, what are you doing?" Ethan whispered, dread pooling in his stomach. David's smile widened. "I'm sorry, Ethan, I really am, but it's too late to turn back now." The realization hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. David wasn't trying to banish the entity. He was summoning it, feeding it. Panic surged through Ethan as he stepped away from David, his back pressing against the cold wall of the living room. You're helping it?" Ethan stammered, disbelief warring with terror. David's face was a mask of cold indifference. "It needs souls to survive, Ethan, and it rewards me for providing them. I didn't want you to find out this way, but you left me no choice." Ethan's mind raced, trying to comprehend the betrayal. "You used me. You used all of us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. David's expression softened, almost regretful. "I had no other way. I'm bound to it, just as you are now. But it's better to be on its good side, believe me." The shadowy figure loomed larger, its eyes burning into Ethan's soul. He felt an unbearable pressure building in his chest, threatening to crush him from within. Desperation clawed at him as he searched for an escape. "David, please," Ethan pleaded. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." But David shook his head. "There is no other way, Ethan. This is how it has to be." With a final sorrowful look, David stepped back, leaving Ethan alone in the shadow's icy grip. The entity's cold tendrils wrapped around Ethan, squeezing tighter, pulling him into its darkness. He struggled, his vision blurring as the room dimmed around him. In his final moments of consciousness, Ethan felt a strange sense of clarity. He couldn't escape the shadow, but maybe, just maybe, he could weaken its hold on David. Summoning the last of his strength, Ethan gripped the talisman and hurled it towards the entity. The talisman struck the shadow, and for a brief moment it recoiled, its grip on Ethan loosening. David's eyes widened in shock as the shadow shrieked, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Ethan's vision faded to black as he slumped to the floor, the darkness swallowing him whole. Ethan awoke to a blinding headache and the sound of muffled voices. He was lying on a cold, hard surface. He blinked, his vision slowly clearing. He was in a dimly lit room, walls lined with shelves filled with ancient tomes and strange artifacts. Chains bound his wrists and ankles, securing him to the floor. "You're awake," David's voice came from the shadows. Ethan squinted, trying to make out his figure. David stepped into the light, his face pale and drawn. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Ethan. You forced my hand." Ethan struggled against the chains, but they held fast. "David, why? Why are you doing this?" David sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You don't understand what it's like to be bound to that thing. It's either this or madness. It's the only way to keep it under control." Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of what he knew. "The talisman," he said, his voice hoarse. "It hurt the shadow. We can fight it, David. We can end this." David shook his head. "No, Ethan. The talisman is only a temporary solution. The entity is too powerful. The only way to keep it at bay is to feed it." Ethan's heart sank. "And you've been feeding it your roommates. How many, David? How many people have you sacrificed?" David's eyes darkened. "Too many, but it's the only way." Ethan's anger flared. "You're a monster, David. We can find another way. We have to try." David hesitated, conflict flickering in his eyes. "It's too late for that, Ethan. The entity is awake now and it's hungry. It won't stop until it's fed." As if on cue, the shadowy figure materialized behind David, its eyes burning with malevolent hunger. Ethan felt the air grow cold, the pressure in his chest returning. He knew he was out of time. The entity surged forward, its tendrils wrapping around Ethan once more. He felt the icy coldness penetrate his very being, the darkness creeping into his mind, extinguishing his will to fight. His last conscious thought was one of betrayal and despair. As the shadowy figure enveloped him completely, Ethan's vision darkened, and he could feel his soul being pulled from his body. The pain was excruciating, a deep, wrenching agony that tore at his essence. He wanted to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. Slowly, the world around him faded, replaced by an all-encompassing blackness. David watched, his face a mask of stoic resignation as the entity fed on Ethan's soul. The room filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional whisper of the shadow. The process was slow, deliberate, and merciless. "Thank you, Ethan," David murmured, his voice barely audible. "Your sacrifice will keep it at bay, for now." The shadowy figure pulsed with a sickening glow as it consumed Ethan's essence. David stood there, watching as his former roommate's body grew still, the light in his eyes extinguished, replaced by a vacant, lifeless stare. When the shadow had finished, it retreated into the corners of the room, its hunger temporarily sated. The temperature in the room returned to normal, and the oppressive weight lifted. David took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. He had bought himself more time, but at what cost? David turned away from Ethan's lifeless body, unable to bear the sight any longer. He walked over to his desk, his steps heavy with the burden of his actions. He sat down in front of his computer, the screen casting a cold blue light on his face. With a practiced hand, he navigated to the roommate search websites, his mind already calculating the next steps. As he scrolled through potential candidates, a hollow feeling gnawed at his insides. He knew this cycle would never end. The entity's hunger was insatiable, and he was its unwilling servant. Yet, he had to continue. It was the only way to keep his sanity, the only way to survive.